Sorry to interrupt, but should this image be appearing in the live stream right now?
I think that our faces should be appearing in the live stream, but I just popped on over there and I did not see our faces. I
Yeah,
saw Cheryl's presentation.
okay. Right now I see a broken image file icon and it says preserving the Cranberry Bog. Okay.
I think that our faces should be appearing in the live stream, but I just popped on over there and I did not see our faces.
I'm just wondering if I'm doing something wrong.
So I do see it now. It's a 30-second lag. So I just pulled it up again and then shut it down.
Okay.
So yeah. If we're ready to get going, I think that we can start. It's 10:30. Yeah, okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Norman and I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at Landmark Conservancy. This presentation is part of the Headwaters channel of Water Week, which is co-hosted by Landmark Conservancy and Northwoods Land Trust. I want to thank everyone for being here and a big thank you to the Water Week organizers and sponsors. Also, I wanted to mention that your $20 registration from today does benefit the two co-hosting organizations. So thank you for your support. I'd like to note that we'll have a question and answer session for the last 10 to 15 minutes of our time together. So as Cheryl presents, you can drop your questions into the right panel on the side of your screen. And please note that there's a question and answer tab, and there's also a chat tab. So make sure that the questions go in the Q&A tab. So with that, I'd like to introduce Cheryl Content, who will be speaking on the topic of preserving the Cranberry Bog, the Grindstone Lake Foundation's efforts to permanently protect critical lands. Cheryl is a retired university professor who has taught courses in land use and environmental planning. She currently serves on the boards of the Grindstone Lake Foundation and Grindstone Lake Association. Grindstone Lake is a magical place for her for the past 30 years. So working to save its clarity, beauty, and natural functions are critical to her. She'll have about 30 minutes for her presentation and will then address questions. Please join me in welcoming Cheryl Content. I hope you enjoy her presentation this morning.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very kind. I also want to extend my thanks to Landmark Conservancy, Northwoods, and all of the Wisconsin Water Week folks for putting together a great virtual conference. I'd like to start off today by telling you a short story about the results of what happens when a small group of literal strangers get together to try to protect a critical piece of land that is along a lake that they love. So I'm going to start off first by doing some background and some context building about the location, the lake, and the land, and then tell you our story basically in 2 acts. So hopefully it'll be of some interest to all of you, and I really do encourage your questions as we go along. So there is our critical piece of land on this beautiful lake called Grindstone Lake. Grindstone Lake is about a little over 3,000 acres. It has just under 12 miles of shoreline, and it's part of the Cooteray River watershed. So let me just orient you all. Hayward, Wisconsin is north and west of us, about 7 miles. Lake Cooteray, the big recreational lake in the area, is just to our east and south. You can see portions of it down below Highway K there. We have about a 9,500 acre watershed, and half of the lake itself is actually on tribal lands. We have 2 public access points on Grindstone Lake. Grindstone Lake is an outstanding resource water as designated by the Wisconsin DNR. It has very high water clarity. Just to give you a sense, in July and August of 2018, we had Secchi depths of about 17 feet, which is pretty remarkable for lakes of this size and in this location. The concerning part, however, is that our clarity has been declining several inches a year since the mid-1990s. And of course, the leading culprit and the likely offender is phosphorus and phosphorus concentrations. The lake is also becoming, I would say, the backdrop to a lot of development along the shoreline. We've had lots of turnover of properties, small family cabins being torn down, and large lake homes being built. So this parcel of land down here in the bottom left corner is the bog that we'll be talking about. And so let me introduce you a little bit to the Cranberry Bog. It is about 57 acres. We have a little over 1,500 linear feet of shoreline on this parcel of land. It is bounded to the south by County Road K, to the east by wooded lots and private property, and to the west by a DNR boat landing access road. So one of the two public access points to Grindstone Lake is just to the west of this property at the DNR boat landing. There's a natural ice ridge along the shoreline. So it's a pretty significant drop off right there into the lake. Great fishing location and great fish spawning habitat right along the lake there. Here is a 1938 aerial image, and Sawyer County Zoning and Conservation, Kelly Nachuda, says that based on this photo, it was probably an original native or an original forested wetland. And you can see where the connections to other nearby lakes could have very easily been made there. In 38 was the beginning of the first conversion of the wetland over to cranberry bogs. This expanded in the 60s and in the 80s to approximately 27 acres from the lake shore to the rear of the property ended up being in cranberry bogs. It has 2 inlets or irrigation ports that have been cut into the ice ridge. And so there's irrigation ditches throughout the property. This is actually the schematic of the property in the 30s. You can see where the development was right up by the lake. The lake is right along here. See additional development in the 60s, 80s over here. And then in the 90s, there were some upland cells put in that required some significant amount of water movement for irrigation. And as all of us know, the cranberry market had some boom and bust cycles in Wisconsin. And you can see some of those boom cycles in terms of the development here. But now we're starting to see some of the bust cycles. So this was a pretty attractive parcel of land that could have gone up for development. And there were, in fact, several development proposals on this parcel of land. The initial proposal was for 64 units with the wetlands dredged to form a marina, which is really an interesting development. At that time, this was in the early 2000s, the DNR did not approve that part of the development. So the Grindstone Lake Association became involved in about 2007 and started coordinating public hearings and trying to identify strategies that would support potentially development and protect the wetlands and the quality of the lake. And there was a development proposal that was adjusted to then 31 units with wetland protection. And you can see this development proposal with several properties right along the lake here and a bunch back here in the upland area, and then the wetlands being retained there. There was an effort at that time to put together the funding to purchase the land and put it into permanent protection. that failed, and luckily, so did this development proposal, at least from our perspective, so did this development proposal. And so the land was sold again and continued as an active cranberry farm until the early or actually to 2010s. And then additional development proposals followed. None of them came to fruition, but the land began to, it has always sat there as a potential threat to those of us who care about the clarity and the quality of Grindstone Lake. That there was always fear that one, cranberries would be grown there again, and we would have the annual phosphorus loading of the water into the lake from that development, to then residential development, which would not only add lots more people and boats to the lake, but all of the associated changes to this land that could produce harmful effects to the lake. So here is what I would call maybe Act 1 of this short story. And that is the formation of the foundation. Now, you heard me mention just a minute ago about the Grindstone Lake Association, but I want to talk now about the Grindstone Lake Foundation, which was formed in late July of 2018. And it was a group of relative strangers, as I indicated earlier, who were worried about the status of this property, had seen for sale signs on it various times, and wanted to try to form a foundation with the express purpose of raising money to eventually purchase the bog. After a year of hard work and all sorts of legal wranglings and IRS wranglings and various other federal government shutdowns, we finally got our 501c3 status and then a charitable organization status from Wisconsin. And that happened in late 2019. And so we were finally an official charitable organization in 2019 with express purposes to raise funds to purchase the bog and remove the threat of development. So remember, 2019 is when we have our charitable foundation and 501c3, 2019. However, in September of 2018, a full year earlier, the Cranberry Bog went up for sale. We call it the Cranberry Bog, this 57-acre parcel of land, went up for sale on an online auction by the current owner, who was a cranberry farmer, but had pretty much stopped operating it as a cranberry farm. It was on the online auction. We watched it like hawks. And finally, the property sold for about $750,000 to a bidder. Well, it turned out that bidder was a Grindstone Lake property owner who actually won the auction, and the next day approached the foundation to see if we would be interested in taking title to the property and pay off the mortgage that this individual would provide to the foundation to fully acquire the land. In other words, we were extremely lucky. So we set up an arrangement so that by the end of 2020, we would raise the money to pay off the loan for this property, and we would then have clear title to the property as Grindstone Lake Foundation, Inc. And I just want to point out, here are some of the pretty amazing features in the bog. We have a eagle's nest, active eagle's nest, and all sorts of wonderful habitat for monarchs and all sorts of other cool creatures. So as we say, careful what you hope for, because now we were in the position to have to figure out what we were going to do with this land, because we were now, when we agreed to take out the mortgage and try to raise money for it, this group of strangers met at one of the homes along the lake and came up with what our vision was for this property. And here is the vision. It's, as we call it, a clear vision. We want conservation, so we want to protect the water quality and clarity and restore the wetlands and native lands. We want a legacy to ensure the enjoyment of clear waters for our children, grandchildren, and generations to come. We want the property to also provide education, opportunities for the community to learn about the history of the land, cranberry farming, native planting. We also think that by preserving the land, we can actually add value. So we can, by maintaining water quality, we'll have a positive impact on property values. We wanted to see this as a benefit to the lake property owners. And then we also wanted to see it as a recreational site, maybe construct trails for walking and hiking, skiing, snowshoeing, picnicking. So there's our vision. Our plan was then to gain clear title to the land, establish conservation easements so that we could permanently protect the land, which is the interesting part associated with landmark and other land trusts, create accessible recreational areas, and then restore the wetlands and the upland prairie. So we actually see this plan as two phases. One phase is gaining the clear title and establishing the easements, and the next phase is creating this accessible recreational areas and then restoring the wetlands. So I want to talk just quickly about phase one, which is the phase that we have been in since September of 2018, and really actively working on this process up through today. So phase one, acquisition and protection, we needed to raise $800,000 from Grindstone Lake homeowners, area businesses, and friends of the lake. We know we needed to also apply for additional grant funds from Wisconsin DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, and other foundations, and then also to collaborate with the town of Bass Lake, Sawyer County, Landmark Conservancy, and others in order to get this, for us to raise the money necessary to gain clear title to the land and then be able to put it into permanent protection. So our early results. So by August of last year, now remember it was late 2019 when we were actually able to start raising money because of the delays in getting the 501c3 status and our charitable organization status from the state. But by August of 2020, we had raised over $410,000 in grants, pledges, and donations. We worked hard. We talked to our neighbors. We had cocktail parties. We put together grant applications, including one to the Wisconsin DNR Surface Water Protection Program for a land acquisition grant of $200,000. And we were lucky enough to be able to get that grant. And we will be closing out on that grant hopefully within the next 6 months to a year. We also did a mail campaign at the end of 2020. COVID reared its ugly head and prevented a lot of face-to-face meetings. But by the end of 2020, we had raised another $50,000. So here's where we are in phase one, results and what we have yet to do. We have raised about $460,000 in cash pledges and grants. We have the Wisconsin DNR grant that stipulates land protection in perpetuity. And so we will achieve our permanent protection of that land once we get the grant funds from DNR. But we still need to raise $375,000 by the end of this year. And so we will be stewarding some of our existing donors, courting new donors, expanding our donor list and outreach. So we're more than halfway there, but we got a big job ahead of us to raise the additional almost $400,000. At the same time, we're trying to raise some money. There's also the need to start developing a property management plan and think about how we would implement that plan. And so we have established a set of property management principles and objectives. And let me just go through those very quickly so that you get a sense of what we are trying to do in terms of our goals for the land. Part of the reason that we are doing this is that we believe that these principles and objectives, as well as some of the associated designs, may actually help us raise the money to secure the land. And then we'll go through another fundraising process to get the money to do the work associated with these management principles and objectives and designs. So our principles have been from the very start, and these are back to our vision, the clear vision, is we want to protect and enhance Grindstone Lake water quality. That is probably our most important principle. We want to try to preserve our wetland habitat and restore, perhaps even restore some of the areas to natural wetland functioning. We want to also become an asset to the community. There is very little outdoor recreation that is publicly accessible in Sawyer County. As you think of parks, there aren't very many. There are lots of lakes that are accessible by boat, through boat landings, but there's very little parkland in Sawyer County. So we've decided that we'd like to enhance the recreation public access opportunities to this lake and to these lands. We want to also see this big parcel as an opportunity to educate citizens and property owners on various aspects of both wetlands and wetland functioning, as well as some of the things property owners might be able to do to protect their land, their shoreland, and other types of things, activities that might actually continue to preserve the high quality of Grindstone Lake. And we know to do all of this in terms of property management, we're going to need to establish partnerships. So let's go back to those 5 principles and talk about what that specifically could look like. Well, to protect and enhance the lake quality, our primary objectives there are to reduce phosphorus loads and reduce shoreland sediment loads. And so this is a situation whereby removing the threat of development from that area, we may be able to reduce some of the potential sediment loads. And then also by locking up whatever phosphorus that we have in these lands from being put back into the lake, we may be able to protect the lake's quality. We're also working on habitat preservation and restoration. We've got lowland wetlands, about 23 acres, that are the closest to the lake on the northern end of the property. We have the upland, we're calling it a prairie area because while it was turned into cranberry cells, that land is still very much maybe 8 to 10 feet above the water level of the lake. And then there's also a forested part of the property. And I'll just show you right here. This is again the lower elevation cranberry areas that were part of that natural wetland that we saw back in that 1938 area photograph. Here are the upland cells that were created that we believe could actually be restored into perhaps native prairie lands. And then here is the forested area. The bald eagle nest is right around here. And these are areas that could be managed as forests, be used for trails, and a variety of other activities in that area. Our third objective, again, was to enhance recreation and public access. So we're talking about non-motorized trails, boardwalks, perhaps over some of the wetland areas for educational purposes, and then lake access. We have a couple of natural inlets that we believe that we could use. We've actually set up docks on one of them, dock pieces on one of them, to allow people to land their boats against the dock and come up and use part of the bog land as a place to explore that is open to the public. Our fourth educational principle, our objectives here are signage and perhaps putting in demonstration sites for shoreland and wetland restoration. And then finally, establishing partnerships. We've already made connections with the Lakota Tribal College that's in the area and the local Hayward K-12 schools. We have made connections to the town of Bass Lake, Sawyer County, other agencies and nonprofits and businesses. And you're seeing some of the logos of the folks that we've started to work with and reach out and try to gain some momentum, both in fundraising as well as in managing this property in perpetuity. The next phase is preliminary designs, and here's where I'm going to say we got really, really lucky. We heard about the University of Wisconsin-Madison Landscape Architecture program having a capstone course for their graduating students. It's a year-long effort, and one of their students actually picked us as his project for his capstone project for his bachelor's degree in landscape architecture. It has project with deliverables and a steering committee that includes members of the foundation board as well as other individuals that we think would be helpful in helping our student, Billy Atchison, in completing his work. So I'm now going to show you what happens when you have an architecture student involved. Now we get some pretty interesting drawings. Again, the lower area with the one of the entry points from the lake. We have the wooded upland areas and then the potential, the area up here that is currently cells for the wetlands. What Billy has done is to create two design options. We'll end up influencing him down to one, but I wanted to share these with you just so you can see the different ways this parcel of land could be envisioned. I'll do this very quickly. This is the native landscape plan that Billy has prepared. And again, I want to state that Billy is preparing ideas for our consideration. He is a student, so he has things he has to do as part of completing his degree, but he's also giving us great ideas, input, designs, cost estimates, all of that sort of stuff. That's pretty cool. So you'll see in Billy's native landscape, he is keeping the open bog, doing some wetland scrapes in various places. He's got trails, educational nodes, an outdoor classroom, a birding tower to watch birds, and then a visitor center here. Interesting design, one that we are looking at seriously as a way by which we could actually do something with this parcel of land. The second idea is to make a sort of an educational, a nature-based educational campus here, where he would retain more of the berms, have boardwalks. He's even proposed a solar panel garden, which we would love to do. However, the DNR restrictions on the land would not allow that. We've already explored that. But you're seeing some of the alternative ways you could use this parcel of land, which we think will help potential donors and agency and nonprofits sort of see a vision for this parcel of land so it becomes a real asset to our community. So what are our next steps? Well, We have to raise another $400,000 by the end of the year, at which point we will finalize our property management plan using some of the help from Billy, but we will get some of our general objectives and strategies in there, and then a proposed plan, which will then allow us to obtain our DNR grant and gain clear title to the land. That will then allow us to put the land into permanent protection. There are restrictions that are placed on the land according to the DNR grant. Those will have to be recorded with the parcel in Sawyer County, so that it'll be permanently protected. And then we get to start raising funds for grants, gifts, and for other property restoration. And then the hard work of beginning the restoration trails, educational programming begins. So this is our motley crew of people who were relative strangers at the beginning and now have become very close friends, as a matter of fact, as we move our way forward with this shared goal and a shared desire to protect this land. So I will end at this point and tell you, just in retrospect, I had no clue what we had gotten ourselves into. I have learned so much in this process. I have even learned how to ask for money from people politely and with a great deal of trepidation. But I do want more than anything else to say that a group of dedicated people can really make a difference and achieve what many had said was going to be impossible, which was to protect that parcel of land. And for 2 decades, people had been talking about it, working on it, and I think we're getting close to actually making it happen. So I will turn it over back to Sarah for questions and answers, hopefully.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. It's really fun to hear, a land protection story when it's in the works. And working for a land trust, I know that we can't always share the story along the way. So it feels exciting to hear it as it's unfolding. So thank you so much. Right now, there are no questions in the question panel. So if anybody who's listening to the presentation does have anything that they'd like to ask Cheryl, please drop those questions into there. And Cheryl, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to share that you didn't, like maybe your biggest surprise from working on this project?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the biggest surprise for us was how to start raising funds. We have two among our board. We have a dentist, a lawyer, a former and retired marketing person, a chief financial officer, and an alumni board participant at a university. And so we have people who have no direct background in doing any sort of fundraising. And so we really struggled at the beginning to figure out how to get started. What would we do? How would we do it? None of us had ever asked people for money in a direct way. And what we learned is that people are very passionate about this parcel of land, and that it is really something that people are willing to put their money forward. And as you saw, we've gotten $250,000 from local landowners for this parcel of land already. And so as we move forward, we will just continue to go back to those same people, expand our list, and try to get the rest of the money that we need.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's really amazing what you have done without a lot of fundraising experience. So we did have a couple questions come in. The first one says, there's a lot of cranberry marsh restoration going on in New England, and there are entire state dedicated programs out there. Has there been any collaboration with these folks?
Yep. So I will say that the foundation directly has not been collaborating with those folks, but as part of his project, Billy Atchison, our student, has had to do what is called Precedent Studies. And one of the ones that he has looked at is a prime example from New England. And it's a parcel very much like ours that was in cranberry production. And he has used that to help generate some ideas on how to use this parcel of land. One of the ideas that he brought forward was the solar panels. That is a very common thing that happens, from what I understand from Billy, in New England, that when an old cranberry bog is put to rest, a lot of the land may be perfectly accessible with great sunshine for solar panels. DNR has said that's probably not going to be in the cards for this parcel of land, even though we think it could be very effective. We're still looking at the possibility of maybe putting some panels on the roof of one of the buildings. Most of the buildings, however, are in the forested area, so we're going to lose some of the great sunshine there. So yeah, we have looked at some of the work going on in New England, but perhaps we need to look more also in terms of their how they garnered funds for the work they're doing. So great question though, thank you.
Yeah, well, and I think if we've learned anything during the pandemic is that the world is smaller than we think it is.
That is for
so
sure.
Connecting with people out in New England doesn't seem too crazy.
No.
Okay, we'll get on to our next question. What would be your first piece of advice for other lake associations thinking about trying to protect lands?
I would say dream big. I have been associated with this lake for about 30 years, and I remember one of my first visits to this lake, my grandfather-in-law said, "We got to protect that bog. That's going to turn into an eyesore. We're going to have more development. We got to get that bog land." So for 30 years, it had been part of the lore of Grindstone Lake. And as you saw from the history, there have been numerous iterations of attempts to develop that land into residential units. And I think you just have to keep dreaming big and hoping and praying that a small group of committed people can make this happen. There will be frustrations, there will be setbacks, but in the final analysis, what really matters is protecting that land in perpetuity. And to see the joy in my nieces and nephews when they go and walk on that parcel, knowing that their family members have had a part in making this be something that will be an asset to them and their children, is reward enough for all of the scary steps that we've taken along the way that have worked, and some that haven't. So
yeah, well, dreaming big and keeping in mind the benefits to other people, and
yeah.
Sounds like your group sure has some perseverance.
Yes, and of course, on top of everything, we've had, as all older groups have, lots of joint replacements along the way. So people have been out of commission, we had health issues, COVID, everything. So it's created a really interesting environment for us to do our work, but we're doing the best we possibly can.
Okay, this next question I think is in reaction to one of the designs that you shared from the student at UW-Madison. I don't often think of ATV trails as being something that goes along with land preservation and restoration. Is this being included as a way to facilitate partnerships and to bring in more donations?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The parcel had an easement, a renewable easement on it when we purchased it. And it was an easement to the Snowmobile Association, actually, in the area. And it's used for snowmobiles in the wintertime. It is not currently going to be used as an ATV trail at all as part of our recommendations. We're talking with DNR as to whether we can continue that easement on the south portion of the property that is very close to the highway, to see if we could continue that easement and actually use it as a fundraising purpose, in a fundraising purpose. If, however, we're not able to do that, then we'll have to, unfortunately, either work with the county to move that easement over into the road easement so that they could actually perhaps move the snowmobile trail closer to the road and keep it part of that easement, or they'll have to find a different route to the lake. So they cross the property right through that area so they can get on the road to the landing and then take the snowmobiles down the boat landing onto the lake and across the lake. So, and with global warming, there may not be any frozen lakes any longer, so we might not even have to worry about snowmobiling. So who knows? No, I'm teasing about that, but it is an issue. Again, I want to stress that the work that Billy is doing for us is his work and his ideas. It doesn't mean that's what we'll end up doing, but thank you for that question, because it meant you really saw that ATV trail there that we obviously has a backstory to it and will be part of our conversations and negotiations going forward. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question and we have about 5 minutes left here just for a time check. So this last question that I have right now is, has there been any, or has there been thought to look towards other protection efforts to protect other wetlands and natural land cover area around the lake as a potential next step beyond this initial awesome effort? And then says, not that you don't have your answer already.
Yeah. That will be for the next generation, I believe, to work on that one. So the Grindstone Lake Foundation has as its in its bylaws and when it was incorporated, is to protect lands, and I believe the incorporation language says particularly the Cranberry Bog. There is nothing that would prevent us from making changes out into the future for the Cranberry, for additional parcels of land to be protected around the lake. I think at this point in time, I'm going to confess, just on my own part, not on the part of the board or the foundation in any stretch of the imagination, but just for me, if we can get the money raised and get a plan put together and start seeing products from that plan, I think it's time to share the wealth of energy, enthusiasm, and work that needs to be done with others on the lake. You know, I will say our land trust, Landmark, has been really helpful with us over this process in helping us generate some ideas for fundraising, seeing it as a parcel of land that with permanent protection would need some management, even if it just laid fallow for that time. So we've been working with various groups. Grindstone Lake is getting pretty well developed though. And so we'll have to see what ends up happening. This may be the longest stretch of undeveloped land on the lake shore. And it's why it's so important for us to be thinking about how to protect it. So, thank you. Good question though.
Yeah. Okay, this will be our last question. Has there been any resistance to the work of the foundation to acquire and restore and protect this area?
Well, I don't know whether there's been any resistance directly. I think, and part of it is that we've reached out to property owners around the lake primarily. And so they see this as a benefit to them and their property values, frankly, and to their long-term usage of the lake. We have a lot of folks who have not contributed yet. even $50. And maybe that's a form of resistance. I don't know. They've all been contacted. They've all had the chance to participate in helping us raise the funds. But there's not been any direct resistance. There will be resistance once we start seeing how the land could be used. I've already heard from one neighbor who said, I don't want a whole bunch of yellow school buses parked along this property with kids running around. Well, you know, okay, I get it. But this is an amazing parcel that for kids to have access to that level and size of nature, modified as it is, but potentially restored in some ways, could be really helpful to the local school kids and to various educational groups in town, so, or in the area. So no resistance per se, I'd say is probably the right answer, but maybe inaction is a form of resistance. I don't know. I hope not, because I think there are some really excited people who want to see this happen and are willing to put in not only their time, but their resources too. So thank you. Great questions.
Yeah, great questions, everyone. And a big thank you to Cheryl for sharing this land protection
My
story
pleasure.
today.
My pleasure. Thank you all, and reach out if you have more questions, want to hear more about what we're doing as we're going along. So Grindstone Lake Foundation.
Yes. Awesome. Well, there will now be a break in our agenda. So the next presentation is Charting a Path for Socially Regenerative Agriculture, which is presented by Adam Reimer from the National Wildlife Federation, and that starts at 11:30. So thank you again to everybody, and thank you to Cheryl.
Thank you all.